Could we see a mid-major super conference funded by private equity being formed? Did college football just ruin a 120-year-old tradition with the Army-Navy game? We're going to get into all of it on this episode. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode on the College Underdogs YouTube channel. I'm your host, Trey Smith. Today, we're going to get into a former Colorado State athletic director's comments about private equity in a mid-major super conference. Also, I want to talk about a little more on private equity in general and get some of your thoughts. And then also, let's talk about this Army-Navy game. I'm sure you all saw the news yesterday. It's no longer going to be the only game being played on the second Saturday of December. I've got some thoughts on that and some ideas and would love to get yours as well. So let's jump into it. Former Mountain West Conference athletic director at Colorado State. Okay, we're talking about Jack Graham. I think he might be in politics now. So he did an interview with Sean Keeler of the Denver Post. And I'm not going to put the article on the screen, and I'm going to try not to read a lot of the article. I just want to extract a couple of key points for us to discuss, mainly because I think this one's behind a paywall, and I'm trying to be more sensitive to that because I know, hey, whether you like it or love it, that's how some people pay their bills, and so I'm not trying to take food off anybody's table and share what would be considered premium content, at least not just in full. Now, I'm going to extract a couple of things from it just for the sake of discussion. And this is stuff that's already floating around the Twitterverse, at least anyways. So the first part of this article, again, it's by Sean Keeler on the Denver Post, if you want to go read it in full. In fact, I'll put the link down below. And you might be able to read the whole thing if you have like a free, some of these, they give you like a free click. And then the next time you go back to it, they make you pay or whatever. So I will link it below, but where am I? Okay. So it says, while the Blue Bloods are putting the chess pieces in place for a college football super conference, you line up the best of the rest. And here's the teams that are listed: Oregon State, Washington State, San Diego State, Boise State, Colorado State, Air Force, Army, Navy, Tulane, and UConn. And the way I'm reading this would be UConn as a full member, which I just don't know that UConn would have any interest in something like this. Football only? Absolutely. Talked about that last week. But I just don't see basketball leaving the Big East unless they get a Power 4 invite. So anyways, listed out that conference, said get private equity to foot the bill. And then as an example, the Wild Card Conference presented by Bain Capital. And then this is quoting that former AD, Jack Graham says, if someone came forward and said, we're going to form this new conference and we're not going to just fund the conferences, we'll distribute money to the school for not just name, image, and likeness funds, but funds that can pay players in a replacement for the broadcasting shortfalls. If I were a private equity guy, I would underwrite that. I would look into that. Just like paying players, the transfer portal, unionizing, and mega conferences, private equity in college athletic departments feels inevitable. And then, last month, most of you probably know, two major firms, Weatherford Capital and Bain Capital, announced the formation of the College Athletic Solution. So I'm going to give you some of my thoughts on private equity here in just a second. But let's talk about this conference first off. Obviously, it sounds like he's just kind of predicting that private equity is going to get involved to try and help form a mid-major super conference, which I believe, based off that, would fall under the PAC umbrella. So I'm assuming that would be taking the Pac-2, sort of restoring that conference with other mid-majors to form this quote-unquote super conference. And the teams that he listed, Oregon State, Washington State, Boise State, San Diego State, Colorado State, Air Force, Army, Navy, Tulane, and UConn. My first question to you is, watching this right now, like, do you agree that pool of teams would equate to the best of the rest conference? My next question, or I guess the second part of that question is, and is that enough teams to make a best of the rest conference? I would think if private equity is going to be footing the bill, as mentioned in the article, as predicted in the article, wouldn't you want to load up as many quality programs at the mid-major level as possible to be as competitive as possible, to be able to bring in as much media revenue as possible? I would. I look at this and I think, okay, what about South Florida? What about Memphis? What about UTSA and ECU and App State? Let's get that rivalry in the same conference. What about JMU, UTSA, really the Texas schools in general, Texas State, Rice, UNT, just to get a foothold in the state of Texas? You know, get into the MAC with the Toledos and the Miami Ohios. What about Temple? What about Liberty? Build out that Northeast branch. I'm just curious, like if you were going to build a best of the rest conference or a mid-major super conference, who would you put in? How many teams would it need to be, and who are those teams going to be? I just can't imagine a best of the rest conference without Memphis, without USF, without some of these other teams. I would love to see ECU and App State in the same conference. And you would think if you were going to build out a coast-to-coast conference, you would want to have enough teams to keep balance just for travel and things of that nature when it comes to the other sports. Unless we're just talking football here, which may be the case. I guess that's an option as well. But again, now that opens up a whole nother can of worms of how that's going to impact each of these athletic departments and their other sports. And, you know, are they just stay in the conference that they're in? And then these football, you know, will the conferences allow that? So what would your best of the rest conference be? How many teams would you have in it? Do you agree with those teams? I think my favorite part of that crop of teams that he listed in the article is having Army, Navy, and Air Force all under one roof. That, to me, I think would be really good for college football and really good for a conference within college football, particularly a sort of mid-major super conference. I would love to see, even for right now, I'd love to see Air Force in the American Conference just to join the other two now that the Army is in there, now that Army is in there with Navy. We're going to talk about that game here in just a second. The next thing I want to get into real quick is private equity in general. Let me get my notes situated here. So private equity, just from a bird's eye view, how is this thing going to function in college sports? From my vantage point, in simplest terms, a private equity firm is going to invest dollars into universities or into conferences to foot bills, you know, for revenue, all those things, NIL, paying players, whatever. And in return, they get a percentage of the revenue that conference earns, or that team, that school, that program, depending on how that's going to play out. If you have a deeper insight, practically speaking, on how the private equity in college sports will function in its simplest terms, please feel free to add that to the comments. From my vantage point, it's as simple as we're investing these dollars into these programs, and our expectation is a percentage of the revenue in return. So, with that being said, what is the best case scenario for private equity in college football or college athletics? I'll specifically talk to college football. For me, the best case scenario is that it could level the playing field or at least stabilize it. I think right now what we're seeing in college athletics, particularly college football, is that gap between the haves and the have-nots widening at an alarming rate. It's like they're just sprinting away from each other at supersonic speed. And it's like, okay, is separation completely inevitable? You know, you still have, and I know I should preface, kind of like I did last week, from the top of the top. The elites are really separating themselves. Then you have the rest of those Power Four conferences where the separation that's happening is in revenue dollars, not necessarily in competitive product on the field. Because as I've said, you could take the top tier of the mid-major programs or the group of 5 programs, and they will compete with a lot of the lower tier and mid-tier of those Power Four programs. But the ones that are the true halves, it seems like they're separating at an alarming rate, just with the portal, NIL, and now media revenue. So could private equity for these group of 5 conferences sort of stabilize it, where it's not that it's going to truly level it, where everyone's on the same playing field, but at least halt the significant separation and speed of separation that's happening, and at least maybe bring it back to where it's been before, where, okay, Ohio State and Memphis have never been on the same playing field football wise as it pertains to money and revenue and facilities and in recruiting and all of that stuff. However, on any given year, if a program like Memphis or a program like Tulane now or a program like Boise is able to recruit and keep a roster intact through the utilization of private equity dollars, maybe you could get back to where you have the Boise States beating OU in the Fiesta Bowl. You have the Tulanes upsetting Heisman Trophy winner and USC in the Cotton Bowl. And you start to see those teams that get in that bid for the playoff actually having a shot, other than just being a glorified first round bye for whoever that 5th seed is. So, best case scenario, I think that it could help stabilize the playing field. Worst case scenario, the wrong stakeholders get involved. The wrong entities get involved. Now, for a lot of these private equity firms, the part that at least gives me some peace in terms of them getting involved in college athletics is that private equity firms being involved with higher education in general is not new. Private equity firms being involved in sports professionally is nothing new. So it's not like it's just this completely foreign territory that, they're just trying to get involved with to see if they can make a quick buck. It's at least something that we have some history of, both sports and higher education, that both have had private equity involved with it. However, where this could really go south is if you get the wrong people, the wrong decision makers, the wrong stakeholders involved, and now they're beginning to make decisions in a territory that they don't really have the expertise in. And it kind of reminds me of the same thought pattern that I was sharing last year when SMU joined the ACC. And I said, SMU needs to be careful with this because all these boosters are footing all this money, but the second things aren't happening the way or at the speed, at the pace that these boosters would like, they're going to want to start having a say in things that technically they shouldn't have a say in. And that's when you sort of get the Jerry Jones effect, right? Where the Cowboys are, going on 30 years of not playing in even an NFC championship game. And a lot of people have put the blame for that on Jerry Jones wanting too much involvement in the football side of things instead of just focusing on where he's a Hall of Famer, which is on the business and ownership side of things. And I think if we start to get too much business people trying to make sports decisions, that's where this thing could start to go south. And to kind of put a button on my SMU point, what I was saying is that as those boosters continue to put that money in, pay attention to what happens with SMU. Because sure, while SMU's winning conference championships, and I think they've got a team that could make some noise possibly in the ACC this year, but the second that team's not performing, the second those recruiting classes and those portal classes and those wins and losses aren't performing, I'm curious to see what happens. Because also, people with money, and I've said this before, they always give themselves an out. If something's not going according to their plan or how they expected them to go, there's an out. And so I would just hate to see college football programs or conferences get in a situation with a private equity firm where there becomes a power struggle, a decision struggle, and now all of a sudden money that conferences were relying on is now being withheld, and that's where you could start to see a very bad downward spiral domino effect. So those are my thoughts on private equity. Let me know what you're thinking. Are you for it? Are you against it? Why or why not? If you're for it, what's your best case scenario with it? What's your worst case scenario? And let me know your thoughts on that. And then finally, for today's episode, let's get into this Army-Navy game. If you didn't see yesterday, On 3 Sports reported, I think The Spun was the first to report that the Army-Navy rivalry game will no longer be a standalone matchup under the new bowl schedule. The Celebration Bowl and the Camellia Bowl will be played on the same day. Now, we had this conversation last year, those of you that were here on the channel, whenever Army was officially added to the American Athletic Conference and it was released that the Army-Navy game would not be a conference game because they would not move it from that second Saturday in December to keep that game protected as the only college football game being played in the country during that time on that day. Well, now that we've got bowl games being played on the same day, okay, now they've shown we're not going to protect the day, but who is it? Let me look it up. I got a quote here for you. The bowl season executive director, Nick Carparelli, explained the change. He said, obviously the expanded college football playoff is going to add another level of excitement to our postseason with the opening round games being played on that Saturday that had traditionally been reserved for the first day of bowl season. We were forced to move some games to the week prior to that, notably 2 games on December 14th, which were scheduled around the Army-Navy game. It was very important to us that we protected the time slot, but at the same time providing a full day of college football, which I think our fans will enjoy. So, my thought on this is if you're not going to protect the day, then it's only a matter of time before you no longer protect the window of time either. And with there being talks already that the playoff could expand beyond the 12 teams in the future, I think it would be only a matter of time before that Army-Navy day and time slot would no longer be the only game being played. For 120 years, we thought, okay, Army-Navy, that day will be protected. Well, here we are now, 2 bowl games played on the same day, but we're going to protect the time slot. Okay, so in 2 or 3 years from now, whenever the playoff potentially expands again, now it's, well, we're still going to play the game and it's still going to get, prime coverage, but we're going to play these other games as well during this time slot. Or we're not going to start at the exact same time. So Army-Navy's a 2:30 kick and we won't start the other ones till 3 o'clock. I just think it's only a matter of time before you really continue to muddy those waters. So what's the solution for me? And I brought this up last fall, all right? And some people were in agreement with me. Some people were adamantly against me, but the main reason why the people who were adamantly against me was because they felt like Army-Navy should be protected the second Saturday of December, no other games being played. Well, college football screwed that up. So now plan B, which is my option, is either move Army-Navy to week 0 or even Thanksgiving Day. But move it to one of those places. If you do week 0, don't play any other week 0 games. Army-Navy is the official kickoff to the college football season. You've got millions of rabid college football fans who cannot wait for some college football action that they will watch whoever on week 0. I mean, there were people watching Navy Notre Dame last year, which was an absolute blowout because we are so desperate for college football at that point. Why not play Army-Navy right there? Don't play any other game. You could arrange the schedule to accommodate that. Put Army-Navy as the premier lone matchup on the week 0 Saturday, and now it's a conference game. So now you're allowing the American Athletic Conference, one of your G5 conferences, to benefit from this most watched game of the year to actually being a conference game. Not just being a standalone game that gets, the conference's marketing on it. So So yeah, those are my thoughts on that as well. So let me know, where are you at with Army Navy right now? What do they need to do? And with this happening, with these bowl games being played on the same day as Army Navy, do you think this opens the door to move Army Navy somewhere else in the season, whether you agree with my week 0 or Thanksgiving Day or not, but somewhere else in the season where it can be a conference game? I'm going to be adamant that it needs to be a conference game, period. So, let me know your thoughts. That's it for me today. Thank you for joining me. Trey Smith, College Underdog.